We're delighted to have you here in Dallas. I want to present to you the greatest bunch of Republican precinct chairmen and workers in the whole country. And I want to present to this audience the Vice President of the United States. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That's a tremendously warm introduction. I want to tell you how much I appreciate Peter and all the rest of the people here, that very warm introduction. And I want to, first of all, congratulate Mr. Crouch and Mrs. Seeberger for the magnificent job they've done on this canvas. It's so important to us, party-wise, to have this kind of effort. And I want to say this to you. To see this type of enthusiasm is not commonplace. It's quite rare to see a party organization, particularly in a state that's been a one-party state and been dominated by the other party for so long. And it tells me one thing very clearly. It tells me that the Republican Party in Texas is on the way up, and we're going to win. Now, I thought I might share with you this morning a few views of a former Republican governor in a heavily Democratic state. To let you know that when you elect Paul Eggers, you're not just exercising a judgment that's not going to have any effect and be thwarted and completely obliterated by the partisan efforts of a Democratic legislature. In the first place, before we can have a true two-party system in any state, we've got to have a Republican governor to make this change. The reason being that the governor is the titular head of the state. As such, he is responsible for the directions and the major amount of the legislative proposals that flow to the legislature. And as such, he is also responsible for a great number of appointments. Now, I don't speak purely of patronage. I speak of the appointments that have so much to do with reaching the people and transferring from the government to the people a sense of awareness in what the administration is trying to accomplish. When I was the governor of Maryland, I came in there as the one of the first Republican governors ever to hold that office, and my legislature was very heavily Democratic. Yet in the first year of office, I was able to accomplish a complete tax reform, an anti-water pollution bill that cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $130 million, a very extensive revision of our pollution planning, a regional planning device that was heavily effective in bringing to Maryland a sense of empathy between the subdivisions and the city of Baltimore. And these things were done because I was able to work with a Democratic legislature. Now, I've got to confess to you that as my term went forward into the second year, the honeymoon started to end. But even that is no reason to be afraid of putting Paul Eggers in the governor's house here in Texas. I say that because it becomes doubly important at that point to maintain a constructive adversary climate in government. In other words, to maintain a climate that will allow the people to know what's going on. If you have a government that's dominated by one party, you have tranquility politically. But tranquility doesn't mean that the people are totally aware of what's going on in the government. It generally means just the opposite. It means that too many things are happening behind the scenes in closed decisions without the knowledge of the media or the people of the state. When you have an adversary political climate, even though it may slow to some extent the implementation of reforms and programs, it does assure that they receive the fullest debate and consideration, and it does assure that the poor parts of those programs will be open to the public scrutiny before they are enacted into law. The governor also, as you know, plays a very important part with his veto power. in which he is able to slow up what he considers to be bad legislation. Now, there are other reasons why you should elect Paul Eggers as your governor, not the least of which is the fact that Paul Eggers is a very superior candidate. He is a man in whom the president has great personal trust. He's a man who served as general counsel of the Treasury Department and has headed a presidential commission on harmful drugs and other materials that are of not designated as harmful drugs necessarily, but are highly suspect, such as marijuana. Now, he's done a good job where the president's appointed him. I've had the pleasure of seeing him both in Washington and seeing him when he was a candidate last time at Republican governors' conferences, and I can tell you he's held in the highest regard by the governors of this country and by the people in Washington. And as such, he's going to be able to do a great job for the state of Texas when you put him in that house. I don't want you to think for a minute that we in Washington don't have a very profound interest in what happens in the state of Texas. It has one of the largest electoral votes in the country. We're interested in the 1972 election, too. And we think that Paul's going to be able to help us immeasurably there. And I feel a little remiss to even comment on this to a bunch of very savvy political activists such as yourselves, but I have to say to you that redistricting is a tremendously important thing for the state of Texas. We know that Republican candidates got enough votes in Texas in the last election to justify our having double the amount of congressmen that we have in the United States. And we know that there's some pretty tenuous line drawing that's been going on because of this one-party control. Now, this decennial census is going to set the pattern for the next 10 years, and it's very important that we have the proper controls, the proper balance in the government to make certain that these lines are drawn fairly. Now, I think that one word of caution I'd like to pass on to you. Not for now, but for the day after Paul Eggers becomes governor. Paul Eggers becomes governor of the state of Texas, and that word is this. You're going to find that a lot of things that you feel belong to you as a party organization are going to be transferred to the chief elected executive of your state. And you're going to find that some situations occur in which communication between the governor and the party leadership is going to be sorely tested until you establish your procedures where you give him the input of your recommendations for appointments and your desires for legislation and the like. I found it took almost 9 months after I became governor before communications had reached the proper level and I had a rapport again with my party people within the state. Because a party that's been too long out of power relies on its own party organization too heavily and not upon its elected officials enough. And this becomes a habit. I say this to you because I believe when you elect a governor, you're going to find it very difficult to fall back and regroup and to understand that a political party with an elected chief executive has an entirely different function than a political party out of power. The principal difference is that a political party out of power always must take a negative and an adversary stance in an attempt to get its people into office. It's not used to being supportive of its elected officials, and this takes a transfer of emphasis, which I think you'll find can be made with good communication, but it's important to be ready for it, and important to be ready to recognize that you're going to have some disputes with your governor until you get your communication straightened out. Finally, I simply want to say that being here in Texas is also always a great source of encouragement to me. I find an enthusiasm here in this state that is one of the highest in the country. And I find that the party people here, under the able leadership of Peter O'Donnell, have never let down their efforts to convince the people of Texas that what this country needs is a big change, and it needs a change toward two-party government. But more important than that, the Republican Party in Texas is representative of the principles of government that the Nixon administration believes in. We find you reflect our policies ably, enthusiastically, and we want to express our appreciation to you for all the work that you've done. I certainly feel that the campaigning I've done around the country seems all worthwhile when I find that there are so many people willing to get out into the hustings and work like the very dickens for the party. This canvass that you've accomplished in a very short time is an outstanding thing. It's an amazing thing. And when I look at your fine candidates for the Congress and the state legislature, I can understand why you have that enthusiasm. Keep up the good work, and I hope I'll be back after November to congratulate you on a sweeping success. I brought another campaigner along with me. She says she doesn't make speeches, but you should hear some of the speeches she makes to me at night after I get home. Thank you very much, Ms. Agnew, Mr. Vice President,